there, and welcome to another episode of the DisruptED interviews. Today I am talking to the absolutely fantabulous Chrissie Butler from Core Education, and as I like to refer to her, the number one lady of Universal Design for Learning in New Zealand. No pressure.
Thank you.
Hi Chrissie, how are you going?
I'm all right. Kia ora koutou to everyone out there. Yeah, it's a strange new world right now. Just making it up. Yeah.
Absolutely. And for those of that haven't come across you and their work so far, can you explain a little bit about the work that you do for Core Education?
Okay. So I'm a teacher by trade, worked across the sector, but trained in primary. I work in the kind of inclusive design space. So how can we make learning work for the diversity of learners in our spaces, both students and teachers and whānau and wider communities. For the last 10 years or so, I've been kind of learning about this thing called Universal Design for Learning, which actually turned my own practice upside down. I kind of worked in that inclusive space for years, trying to do the best that I could, but I hadn't looked at the way that I plan learning from a kind of more, actually, what might I be doing that might get in the way? I was just trying to fix things around kids.
Yeah.
And so Universal Design for Learning is it's that dreaded framework word, which is a bit of a sleep word, but it's brought together a bunch of thinking around effective practice and kind of organized it in a way that helps you think about diversity and planning for diversity. And the beautiful bit about it that I think is really helpful for the now is that it has this beautiful design cycle, which is a people-centered process for how can we make things work. Yeah.
For most of our learners. So what have you noticed so far? So obviously you're often working in the face-to-face space, but obviously acknowledging increasingly that practice has become blended and people have been working in both online and physical spaces in their schools. In the last couple of weeks, as we've shifted into this sort of new normal of remote teaching and learning, what are some of the things you've noticed so far in terms of Universal Design for Learning and the part that it can play in this space?
I mean, I think the biggest, the most significant thing is the huge variability, one, in opinion about what we should be doing, and two, in actually the context of young people and their families and communities.
Yeah.
That actually what learning at home is, the home bit is, there's massive variability, you know, from people who are have worked from home for always, and a student may be at home, to families where actually both parents are part of essential services, there's every combination, but there's also huge variability in opinion around what we should be doing. And I think from a universal design perspective, that's, we can help there. So I guess for me, opinion at the moment, and a very kind of linear, generalized way of talking about it, is the let's jump online and either do what we do face to face, or innovate a brave new world in it online, or there's a kind of, whoa, it's let's take a people-centered approach, but that may be which again encompasses, it might be a pushback against technology, it might be a fear factor in that space, but there's that those two things at the moment are often presented separately. And I think one of the things that the universal design can do is possibly bring those together
Yeah, because I've been thinking increasingly, like I'm big on this idea that actually the first thing we needed to worry about was people's well-being and them being safe and happy and healthy and okay in the space that they're in. So in a
Yeah.
sense, there was a message about putting learning on the back burner, yeah, because quite frankly, your well-being mattered first. I think as we move on through time, we're going to have to change that message a little bit and think about how we present our learning encompassing well-being and actually making sure that we're designing for diversity and diverse learning needs is, in a sense, weaving the well-being into how we deliver the teaching and learning. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think from if the little cycle that I talked about, which is kind of a way to approach planning learning, it's first kind of port, if you want, or point of beginning is who are the people and what is the context.
Yeah.
It's not what is the content we've got to teach. I mean, a provocation of content usually brings you to a situation where you're going to have to do some planning. You know, what am I going to do with the reading group, or what do I do usually? And now I'm in this context, what will I do? But I think if we can begin from who are the people and what do we know? And there are things that we definitely do know, even without having direct contact with whānau, is that everybody learns differently.
Yeah.
And if we present information or we provide single options for students to participate, it's not going to work for some.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, because I know in the secondary space, we're running a risk of death by Google Meeting or Zoom Meeting,
Absolutely.
which is important. But if that's the only mechanism, it's not going to meet the needs of all of our learners.
No, it's not. I mean, I think paramount, I think both for all across the sector, is that someone is having direct contact with tamariki and whānau. How that's organised, I think every community makes that up. Will have to work that out for themselves, because it's critical at this time that no one gets lost.
Yeah.
Like there would have been a whole bunch of young people who in face-to-face things weren't working so well for. And possibly they may not be the first people that we're thinking about when we're coming to how we're going to make this work. But actually, I wonder if we can problem solve and work with those tamariki and whānau, some of the solutions that they come up with, we can actually build into a way of working.
Yeah. So gathering that student voice is going to be really key, isn't it? And community voice.
Yeah, and I think how you do that, I mean, in schools, there are always those little points where there's often someone in your whānau community that knows absolutely everybody. And so making sure that we still link those into the ways that we're working. Just because all of a sudden all the kaiako have gone online into this little hub, we mustn't lose people. And I think that also with RTLB, learning support staff, RTLets, or that whole community, people in LSC roles, learning support coordinator roles, it's like they have immense knowledge and expertise that are taonga really for now.
Yeah. And we've got to design systems to make sure that they're having access to the space still, because often we've relied on our LSAs just fronting up in the classroom and sitting alongside a learner.
Absolutely.
And what we've recognised in our context, that actually we haven't necessarily ensured that the LSAs even have the tools and the skill set to engage with learners in this online world that we suddenly find ourselves with. So we're having to play a bit of a catch-up game and a think around what does that even look like in terms of that one-on-one support or that sort of guide on the side type style support that they would have had in the classroom. I always remember you've got your phrase that you use about, is it designing for the edges or designing for the outliers, that concept of, making sure that when we design, we're thinking about the students that are on the real edges and outlying of the sort of the spectrum of needs in our classes. If I was a classroom teacher and I'm starting to think about next week we're going into our next or our first phase of pure online teaching and learning. What does it look like when I'm designing learning for, is it edges or outliers? I keep getting my terms mixed up that you use. What's the Chrissieism?
What's the Chrissieism? I guess the Chrissieism has kind of changes and moves as I learn more. I think often it's what you're looking for is the breadth of the way people learn in the community that you're working with. So say your class, and the breadth of support that might be needed, and the breadth of stretch. And so the edges of that stretch are a great reference point for, I've got to make it work for everyone. And so, if for example, if I'm teaching in maths, for example, but actually I know I've students who may need support for literacy. I need to plan in the way that I'm working to make, that instructions for tasks are not just written, but they're maybe spoken, or that students know how to use text to speech so that they can listen back to the instructions.
And actually, one thing I should have done is turn on the captions for this, because that's the other thing that people need to remember, that they can record these meetings and have the captions recorded at the same time.
Yeah, bottom right hand corner, little 3 dots.
Sorry, Chrissie.
No, that's cool. That's cool. But just that we irrespective of the curriculum area that you're in, is that you have in your head, actually, I'm going to need to give support for literacy.
Yeah.
And so if I'm giving instructions, actually, can I give a graphic support for that instruction too, and offer that to everybody?
Yeah.
And in the same way you might do if you've got mathematical terms or terms specific to your learning area, that you have done the let's link them to an online. What does this mean? And an example.
It doesn't mean creating all of those things from scratch either, does it? It often just means getting good at curating different modes and methods of learning the same skill or concept that you happen to be covering. It doesn't need to be exact, but same concept or skill that you're learning at any given time.
Yeah. I think the other thing too is, if we're talking about that edges idea, is in terms of stretch and extension. It's just that we offer a range of activities, but that we don't box students into, actually, you can only do this bit.
Yeah. And that frustrates kids at both ends of the spectrum, doesn't it? The ones who want to race ahead and the ones who need to take their time can both be frustrated by the one-size-fits-all, bit by bit chunking.
Absolutely. And also I think people's contexts right now, which is why that people first thing is imperative that we begin there. Like for some whānau, like house may be so busy, and the idea of having a quiet space to do a big piece of work as a student is kind of like unthinkable. Whereas other students might find that they're on their own all day.
Yeah.
So just that people-centered stuff. And I guess the we cycle that we use is, who are the people and what do we know? What is the purpose of the learning? And so being really cognizant of what that is, and then thinking what might get in the way that I design it. So if as people are putting work online, especially, just being really aware of who's on the other end of the work, and what their experience might be. And I think when we start this, teachers are going to give it a go for a week. But then we've got to ask students, how is this working for you?
Did that work? So having a cycle of feedback and getting voice from them as you go to make sure you're actually meeting the needs. I know that we've just done a whole lot of surveying, and because we had a few days before the holidays, and we're already looking at redesigning how we're going to deliver it with a bit more structure and a bit more flexibility at one end of the week and the other end of the week, in response to the student voice we've gathered so far. What are some of your suggestions? Like, I think, you know, having supported teachers in a range of contexts engage with universal design for learning, particularly through e-learning, I often think, and I say this with real kindness, because I think whatever you do is good and whatever new practice you adopt is good. But often they look at a bunch of different multimedia sources and think they've nailed it. You know, it's like, yep, I'm doing universal design for learning. I've got a video and I've got a piece of written work and the odd podcast thrown in. Nailed it. So if that might be a really neat place to start in terms of making sure you've got those diverse modes of engaging with the learning. And if you were a teacher who had nailed that bit, what would be your next step?
Think about who's on the end of your learning.
Yeah.
And actually that would be my first step.
Yeah.
Is you know, we you know, there are teachers that are going to have lots of access to online, and then there are actually going to be a whole bunch of kaikoura that don't. You know, whānau don't have Wi-Fi, and we're doing everything over the phone.
Yeah.
And making suggestions. And so who's at the
end? I know
of
that the ministry are also planning for jetting out hard copy of material as well, because we do have whānau and family who are totally offline during this time and are going to be thinking of, you know, engaging with learning in a completely different way.
Yeah. And I hope that what's offered to in that hard copy is also universally designed so that, you know, those options and support is built in. I guess one other thing in terms of something that a risk I think that we could avoid, a kind of tough experience for kids, is that in the high school space generally, the move to online, like, we're already there for many schools. However, we've always had a massive face-to-face component, but now students at home, and predominantly they're just at the end of this wave of online content coming from schools. And I think some coherence at the school end around, you know, how much are we sending, and also from a kind of parent point of view, like, if you know, lots of parents have got kids at multiple ages who are all receiving stuff online, and just that each school has got some continuity at their end and are talking together, teaching teams, syndicate teams. It's like, actually, not that everybody's doing the same,
but there's a consistent practice or a consistent way of working.
That you know, the values and beliefs and the culture of your school underpins what you do. But at a practical level, it's like, let's monitor the wave of work that is hitting homes. I
can absolutely talk about that from a personal level. I've got two daughters who are 1 year above the other. The younger one seems to be fine. She's just, you know, going into her Google Classrooms, doing her other thing. The one that's a year above just went, Mum, I can't even get through my inbox. I don't know where to start. And so she's, at the moment, she's checked out. I mean, I'll work with her to make sure she checks in, you know, once the holidays are over. But at the moment, I'm just leaving her to her thing over the school holidays. She goes, I just don't know where to start. I don't know where to start. And I don't think she'll be alone in that experience in terms of, you know, because it's different ways of working. Like, I suspect that my two daughters probably received the same amount of information, but one of them went straight to the Google Classroom and just worked through it that way. The other one made the mistake of looking at her inbox and the notifications and just went, no, can't be bothered, too hard basket. I'm just going to put it over here for the moment. So, I totally agree with that. And I really, one thing we've learned and that we've certainly got from reinforced from the feedback from our students, that less is better, and people really recognising that they're not going to get through the level of work that they would face-to-face. You need to half or quarter your expectations around the volume of content. And the good thing is, for the most part, there's a lot of fat in our teaching and learning anyway that is for all intents and purposes, bells and whistles and busy work. And if we take the time to par back to the threshold concepts and skills, if that's what you're focusing on, and I think that comes back to what you were saying about the purpose of what you're learning.
Yeah.
You know, and really focusing on the purposeful stuff. So in terms of our fabulous teachers out there wading their way through all of this, what are some of the sort of tips and suggestions about where they might look to get further guidance on their universal design for learning journey? Because I think it's, you know, from personal experience, I think it's one of the most powerful frameworks that you can invest time in, because it's actually, on one level, it's beautifully simplistic. Yep, there's a lot to it. But, you know, I would absolutely suggest that if you're worrying about one thing, rather than thinking about every app and tool that's being thrown at you, and actually focus on universal design for learning, you're actually going to be better off in the long run.
Yeah.
So where do they go? How do they start this journey, Chrissie?
I mean, the place that a bunch of us have been involved in building is inclusive.tki, which is a ministry website where we have been trying to illustrate what universal design for learning looks like in Aotearoa. And it also has sections on how to plan in primary and in secondary.
Awesome.
That's definitely the main place. If you're a Twitter user, there's the UDL community, the international community is awesome.
Yep.
So if you just hashtag UDL, you'll find them all.
Awesome.
You know, I'm happy for people to get in touch. There's a wee team of us here at Core, with Linda Ojala and Lynn Silcock.
Yeah. And a lot of people can use if they've got PLD hours sitting at school at the moment, and they're not going to necessarily be using them in the way that they thought they might have been. Now's a really good opportunity for schools to pivot and use that PLD funding for this, isn't it?
Yeah, I think for me, like, there's immediate need, but actually I'm interested in the long game. You know, there's an opportunity to learn about inclusive design at this time. Although I'm, you know, PD for the concept of PD for teachers at this time is just like, you know, we're just trying to deal with what's in front of us. But I think, you know, this period as it isn't going to last very long.
No.
And there's an opportunity here to build relationships between kaiako and akonga and whānau that we may never get again.
Yeah.
And we know from, you know, the research tells us that that's such a key part of effective learning. And so even if that, you know, that is your focus and you're wrapping the learning around that, I think, you know, it's
I find that even as a school leader, I feel closer to my community than I ever have.
Absolutely.
You know, and I'm not doing it at that classroom level necessarily, although I'm sort of keeping really close to my head students and connecting with them on a really regular basis. But I think you're absolutely right. So yeah, understanding and connecting with your family and whānau and students, number one, but then also if you are going to look at developing yourselves in these complex times, it would be time well spent to do it with a UDL lens.
Yep, totally. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, I'm recognizing that I'm really trying hard to keep this succinct. Do you know how hard it is?
Absolutely. Totally cool.
Trying really, really hard, Chrissie. Just in terms of any final words of advice, tips, encouragement that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think I guess there's two things that you know, one, there's a huge amount of decision making going on at the moment, and so that notion of decision fatigue is, you know, it's pretty full on, and it's full on for whānau. So I think when we need to ask, but we need to do that in a really sensitive way, that we're not loading them with having to make the decisions.
Yeah.
So I think the notion of that we make calls and we listen and then speak into that space. I I think is key, and that's kind of like part one. If we start there, if we start with the people, we'll be sweet.
Awesome. Thank you, Chrissie. And I will make sure that I provide the links below to the Inclusive TKI and your contact details, and remind people about that UDL hashtag on Twitter. Thank you so much for giving up your time today. I look forward to sharing this. And for everyone that's watching this, keep an eye on the DisruptED TV channel on YouTube. You can subscribe. There'll be interviews dropping daily. So thank you, everyone, for joining us.